What's so funny? Oh, you're driving. Can you hear me, Jonathan?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Alrighty.
I'm focusing on the road, but I'm also participating.
God. All right. I'm now responsible for what happens.
Yeah, I can hear you.
While he's driving.
I'm focusing on the road, but I'm also participating.
God. All right. I'm now responsible. All right. There we go. Okay, that's on. Go live. Facebook is on. Okay, cool. Just here.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
Welcome everybody to this episode of the Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday afternoon, and today I'm just going to share my screen with you. We've got Jennifer on, and we've also got Jonathan Honing on, but Jonathan is driving, and I'm worried. So now my responsibility. What happens? These city boys driving is suspect to begin with.
Robbie.
Oh, and we've
joined the meeting.
And we've got Robbie Segler, who just joined as well. So hi, Robbie. So you've got Jennifer, Jonathan, and Robbie, and we might have some other people joining in as we go along. All right, today is we're going to be taking questions from you. So a number of sources for the questions that I'm going to be taking. One is we're going to be alternating between Jennifer, Jonathan, and Robbie. Taking questions from them, and then we're also going to be taking your super chat questions. So any super chat questions you might have, I use the super chat feature on YouTube. So those of you in Facebook, if you want to ask a question, you might want to switch over to youtube.com/Yaron Brook questions. I'm available to answer questions on anything. Hopefully I know something about the issues that I'm answering about. But I will leave it to you to ask to choose the topics. Okay, let's see. I think we're all set. I think we've got YouTube. We've got some people on Facebook and YouTube. Cool. All right, we're going to start with Jennifer. Then we're going to go to Jonathan. Then we're going to go to Robbie. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Do you think there's actually anything legitimate that the Dems have to impeach Trump with?
Do I think there's anything legitimate that the Dems have to impeach Trump with? Well, depends what you mean by legitimate. By the standards of politics of today, no, probably not. There's probably not enough to impeach him. I mean, I think the whole issue of obstruction of justice is open, but I don't think it's enough to actually impeach, and I don't think they have the votes probably to impeach it. Even in the House, I'm not sure that they would win the votes to impeach it. By the standards of modern politics, I doubt it. I doubt it. I mean, look, Republicans impeached Bill Clinton for, I think, less than what Trump has done, but that was stupid in my view. Again, I think this is true of Democrats and Republicans. Focus on the issues. Let's have a real discussion of the issues. If you have clear-cut, unequivocal proof of obstruction of justice, and if there's clear proof of that, then obstruction of justice is a pretty serious offense. But it's more an attempt to obstruct justice than an actual obstruction of justice, from what I understand of the Mueller investigation, because Mueller said nothing changed in terms of his investigation because of what Trump did. Let me also say this. I am not following this. I haven't found it that interesting, and I haven't followed it that much. So, and I didn't watch the Mueller thing, and I haven't read the report. I find it relative to everything else going on in the world and relative to the problems that we have and the real problems with Trump and with the Democrats in terms of ideological problems. I find the Russian investigation and this whole stuff, relatively speaking, a sideshow. So, sorry, I don't have a more definitive answer.
Thank
All
you.
right, Jonathan, while you drive, can you ask a question?
Hi, Yaron. Oh, very quick question on economics, if I could.
Yep.
I'm not asking you for a prediction when it comes to interest rates, but when I look throughout history, I don't remember, maybe you know, a period of time in which you had all these major economies with negative interest rates and, inverted yield curves going back 20 and 30 years. I think all throughout, Denmark and Europe, for example, even out 20 and 30 years, their interest rate curves are negative yielding. So I guess my question is, how do you make sense of this as somebody who's studied finance and economics? And I'm not asking you how do you invest in this period, but what do you make of all these developed countries with negative interest rates on bonds, even going out 20 and 30 years?
Well, what I make of it is you're right. This is unprecedented. There's never been a case. I mean, we had periods in the 19th century with low interest rates, but we've never had a period anywhere close to what we've experienced over the last 10 years. And certainly in Europe right now, we've never had a period of zero interest rates and negative interest rates. And you're right, long-term negative interest rates, which is bizarre. That is, it means inflation expectations and it means risk premia in the future, at least with regard to government bonds, are zero. In the case of Denmark and in the case of Switzerland, to some extent, I think the reason that is a belief that the currency is going to go up in value, which means that you'll make money on the fact that you're holding the currency relative. So real deflation, that the purchasing power of the currency is going to increase. And that is partially because the Swiss franc and the currency in Copenhagen, I forget the name of it, have gone up. The what?
The Danish krona?
The krona, that's right, the krona. They both gone up in value, or you could say the euro has gone down in value as the European Central Bank has basically, done QE 1013. Quantitative easing by buying all kinds of bonds. The other thing is you have to remember that both the Fed and the European central banks were buying long-term bonds and therefore driving long-term interest rates down. I think the other indication is that there is no real, the banks are not lending much, so there's really, there's not a huge demand for loans. There's not a lot of lending going on. There's not a lot of velocity of money. The money supply, if you look at monetary numbers, as far as I can tell, the money supply has not increased by that much, nowhere near what would be suggested by all the printing of money done by the central bankers. I think what you've got is a complete distortion of finance, which is creating massive distortions, I think, across the entire financial world. And exactly what those are is so difficult to tell right now. It's not obvious, like to some extent, maybe people were saying, yeah, home prices are really high, or this particular asset value is really, really high. It's not clear where the bubble is right now. It's not clear where the malinvestment is happening. But for sure, there's massive malinvestment happening. People are borrowing money at very, very low interest rates. And more than anybody, who's borrowing those low interest rates? Government is. So governments are borrowing like crazy at low interest rates. And you already, you can run up, what are we running now? $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion a year, and heading towards $1 trillion a year deficits. Well, you can do that when interest rates are zero, and the interest rate costs of borrowing it is almost zero. In Europe, governments are borrowing like crazy, and you can see the beginnings of it. Look, the European banking system is completely devastated. Deutsche Bank, this, they fired I don't know how many employees now. They're shrinking the business. They're going back to being a very classical, traditional bank because they can't function in this kind of environment that is so distorted, the world in which they live. And of course, they've also been manipulated. They owned a lot of Greek debt. They owned a lot of debt, government debt in Europe, because the governments kind of require the banks to own the debt. So what you're seeing, certainly in Europe and the US, is, I think, massive distortions in the financial markets and in investments. And yeah, the economy is doing fine in the US right now, but we don't know what's going on kind of underlying all that. We don't know where the distortions and perversions are that are going to lead to the next recession or financial crisis or crisis or whatever, or long-term stagnation, which I think is quite likely, just long-term slow economic growth. You notice that the government just re-estimated GDP for the last quarter, that there was above 3, that Trump and many others were praising as, oh, we went above 3 for last year. They estimated downwards to 2.5. And the number for this quarter, or the last quarter that ended in June, is 2.1. And they're estimating GDP growth to be lower in the future. I just think the whole world economy is in a low growth kind of stagnation. And I think a lot of that is due to the Fed. A lot of that is due to monetary policy and the kind of the insanity of what the Fed has been doing for 10 years and what the European Central Bank has been doing in 10 years, and these negative interest rates. And you're right, it's unprecedented. And as a consequence, it's very hard to tell how it exactly manifests itself. I don't know. I don't know how the crisis is going to happen. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what the consequence of it are. I wish I did. I could make a lot of money if I did. Right? A lot of money. I have to admit, I don't follow. I probably should follow some of these numbers more closely to try to see if you can see kind of the trends. Like I'm curious about some of the banking practices, particularly in Europe, in terms of what's going on. I think there are real problems in the U.S. economy. When it comes to debt, I don't think it's in the banking sector. I think it's outside of the banking sector. I think there's some real issues with debt in the U.S. I think the next crisis will come from kind of corporate debt and maybe private equity or private holdings of debt. I think that's where we'll get into trouble in the next downturn, but it's so hard to predict. It's so hard to predict. All right, Robbie, you have to unmute yourself because you're muted right now. There we go.
You're on. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I understand you're lying by the pool or something.
Yeah, actually, I had to come inside. When I just responded that I'd be, that I was going to be listening, I didn't realize I was going to be called upon for questions. So, but
you don't have to.
I've got you, right? No, well, how rare the opportunity is, so that I can catch you live. So, there's been something that sort of percolating. I figured. I had a question about the way that it's sometimes pitched, the idea that to find a purpose bigger than yourself.
Oh, good. That's a good question.
Yeah, that kind of reasoning, and very often it's seen in objectivist circles as, well, that's just straight up altruism, right? If it's the idea that there's something bigger than yourself. But I've been just sort of percolating the idea, and I'm wondering what you're thinking, what your thoughts are on it. With, the idea of Jordan Peterson, very, very, very popular, and lots to hate, but certainly the idea of responsibility. He talks about how you being responsible first for yourself, and then once you get good at that, for your family, and then once you get good at that, for your community. And so that is, that all of a sudden, does that give you this altruistic kind of slant to what he's saying, and the whole idea of having a purpose, kind of bigger than yourself, or trying to find meaning there. I wonder if that's just not sort of somehow related to, we live in a world where we want, survival, just our daily survival, going back, was just our everyday purpose. And then once that was kind of taken care of, historically it was, well, then there was just kings and queens, and that entire period of history where purpose was, here's what you should do and here's what you should do. And today we're in this age where you can do whatever you want, right? There isn't anything that you have to do on a moment-to-moment basis that necessarily means you have to survive. And so people are then led to this idea, well, then, so where should I turn? Where do you find real meaning? And sometimes what I find interesting is some of the big philanthropists who were once, big-time businessmen or entrepreneurs that turned to philanthropy, and that somehow, their philanthropy gets, I think, a little bit of a short shrift sometimes, because there comes a certain point, I think, just in an evolution of a person where once they really have themselves covered and their family covered, and let's say they've got the finances to be able to do whatever they really want to do.
Sure.
Well, then the idea of challenging yourself is to say, well, what's a real problem out there? What is something that hasn't been solved that I can solve? And for me, that's where a purpose bigger than yourself comes in. So what are your thoughts on that chain of reasoning?
So you bring up a lot of issues, and no, it's a really good question, and it's a deep question. So first, let me just stop. I don't like the idea of purpose bigger than yourself, because, and I'll get to the charity and all of that in a minute, but I just think that at the end of the day, so let's say you're in that position. You've made all the money you'll ever need. You've kind of tapped out on. You're CEO of the big company, and you've done that. You want to do something different. So you find some cause, and that cause is a nonprofit cause, and you're going to invest in that cause. First, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So zero wrong with that, and I think that could be a wonderful thing to do in life if you're actually pursuing that in a rational way, and you actually really value this cause and really value this pursuit.
And it doesn't have to be philanthropy. It doesn't have to be nonprofit. So let's just say this is just a big. You want to go to space.
Yeah, it could be going to Mars. It could be a business. It could be a second business, right? It could be starting a different business in a different industry, in a different way, or experimenting with something, or building it could be investing heavily in science and figuring out, some question in science that I don't know, right? It could be a lot of things, but I think it's putting it as bigger than ourselves is wrong, because it's not bigger than you. It's your interest. It's your passion. It's a problem you want to solve, and you have to have rational reasons for wanting to solve it, reasons that have to do with your values and your vision and the way you are. So by presenting it as bigger than yourself, it implies that there's something out there more valuable to you than you. And in that sense, there isn't. I mean, even when you say, I'd rather die than my wife died. I'd rather die trying to save my wife than have. You're not placing her life as more important than your life. You're saying that in the context of your life, you couldn't imagine living without your wife or without your child or without the thing. But it's in the context always of your life. Understand it is always your life. So I hate the idea of bigger than yourself, but they're capturing something, and you're capturing something that I think is really important. That is, and Robbie, do you mind muting while just because there's noise, and then if you want to make a comment, unmute. It's just background noise.
I thought I was muted. I've just got the mute button.
I muted you now, so you muted. I muted you, but you can unmute. You can unmute when you want to speak. So I think what we're trying to capture, and what I think the better people, and I don't want to imply one way or the other for Jordan Peterson, but I'd say the better people who are looking for meaning beyond themselves or bigger than themselves, the better people who want something like that, who talk about it, what they really mean is something spiritual rather than something material. I think and you implied that by saying, well, we solved the problem of survival. But in many respects, and I think this is a misunderstanding of Rand's ethics, survival doesn't mean material survival. It doesn't just mean the material problems of how to just stay alive. It means survival qua human being, which is what Ayn Rand talks about. It means survival is the best that you can be as a human being, which means it means living the best life you can live and pursuing the values that contribute the most to your life, to living a good life, spiritual and material values included. And there certainly can be moments in life where living the best life is signing up to fight for liberty, right? So people say the founding fathers had a purpose bigger than themselves. It was liberty. No, it was, they understood the value of liberty in their own life, and therefore they were willing to risk everything for the sake of this spiritual values. But it's not bigger than themselves. It's what their life requires. It comes from them. The meaning, the purpose is found within them in the valuing of liberty. And the same thing with a I don't know, Jeff Bezos wanting to go to Mars, or Elon Musk saying, you know, I'm going to take all my money and I'm not going to invest in some business that is going to produce profits now. I'm going to invest in something that means, you know, going to Mars, which is a childhood dream of mine. I've always wanted to go into space. And even if I don't go into space, I want to have the knowledge that I was a part of getting human beings to go to space, because it's such an important value to me. And that is a value within them. So again, it's not bigger than them. I don't think Amazon is bigger than, any more than Amazon was bigger than Jeff Bezos. And I don't think Amazon ever was, I want to make a lot of money so I can survive. It was, I want to change the way people shop. I want to change the world. But it's not bigger than you. You want to change the world because you want to live in that world, and it's your value to change the world in your image. So I think, and Jordan Peterson, one of the things he says is that meaning is out there and you have to find it out there. And I would argue that no, meaning is within you. That is, meaning is, you have to find objectively your values, and they're in, you know, the place in which they intersect with, and of course your values have to be connected and related. They have to be objectives. They have to be connected and related to reality. And so stuff out there is relevant to your choices and important to your choices. But at the end of the day, it's your values, your choices, and you have to find your meaning, your purpose in you, among your values and what you're passionate and excited about. Does that answer the question, Robbie?
I don't know that it does. I guess the part where I'm getting caught up a little bit is that, and not that I disagree with anything that you're saying, but I'm saying, my point is that historically, the focus never used to be survival. It was always survival, and then it was just what you had to do.
Yes.
And then we went through a long period of what you should do.
Yes.
And today I think we live in a period which is like, do whatever you want. There is no even should anymore. And so that's how the Jordan Petersons, create so much attention, because they're giving a focus on, well, here, given that we live in a world where you can do whatever you want, where is their meaning? So that is that. So I say that historically, but then also, I'm also saying this is true of a person as well. So my goals and ambitions as a student were very much survival, right? The next meal, what I'm doing. I mean, it might have a long-term vision, but it certainly isn't. It changes over time. And then you get to the point where I can take care of things, and you achieve. Let's say you get to the point where you've achieved financial freedom. Yeah. At which point you realize that, okay, now I'm in this direction. I'm in this realm of, I've got myself to a certain point, and so where do you now focus? And that's a growing context. Jeff Bezos always wanted to go to space. All right, bad example for me. But the idea that people get to a certain point, and you wouldn't even be thinking about solving things that I would say are bigger than yourself, outside of your family or community, just the huge problems. You wouldn't even be thinking of those until you've really evolved to that point in your life.
See, but
is my point. And I'm saying historically, it
I don't
sort of
think-
seems to track that as well.
So I don't think that's right in terms of your life. I don't think that's an evolution of life. But I agree with you that you get to a point where you can now consider solving kinds of problems that you couldn't before, whether because of you have money or because you don't have any worries. So your focus is now different. But when you were a student, it wasn't about survival, because it was just about literal survival. Then you might not have been a student. Then you might have just said, I need to just get a job and survive. And a lot of people go and study philosophy, or they go and study sociology, or they go and study English. I don't know. They go and study something that is clearly not necessarily related directly to survival, core survival. They go study something because they believe in something, because because they want to have an impact on the world. They want to change something about the world, and they want to study something that makes that possible for them. They go become teachers instead of going to become Wall Street financiers. So I think that in the modern world, that is a decision. Those kind of decisions are made all the time. I do agree with you that particularly wealthy people have this unique position that they're in when they accumulate so much money they will never be able to spend it, and they don't want to leave it to their kids. Of what do you do now, and what kind of problems do I want to solve now? And that's a great opportunity for them to be in. It's good for them. But again, I wouldn't say it's bigger than themselves. It's a broader circle. They're thinking about problems that are bigger than what maybe they could have thought of 20 years ago, what they would have thought of 100 years ago. But the problems are just bigger, but it's not bigger than them. It's still within the context of their life and their values.
Well, maybe it's just semantics, but that's what you do, right? You're sort of in this position where you don't have to do what you're doing today, but you're solving, this issue of this misunderstanding of the way people even, look at their lives. And that's, so sometimes I guess what I'm suggesting is a more tempered view when people use this frame to find, a purpose bigger than yourself. But often, I'm just sort of offering this alternative lens that I don't hear what you hear. I don't hear that. I consider myself
Yeah, and that could be, and what I'm suggesting is it's an opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to make the point that there's nothing wrong with the things that you're seeking to do and everything like that. But don't think of it in terms of bigger than yourself, because that leads down a road that can lead to altruism or intrinsicism or a lot of different bad stuff. Think of it within the context of your own life, and think about it within the context of value. So I think a lot of rich people, for example, who seek this doing something bigger than themselves, actually, and I've talked about this with Bill Gates, actually pick something that is motivated by altruism or guilt or things like that, because that's what they think the culture and the world around them wants them to do. And I'm saying, no, stop. Think about what your real values are. Don't feel guilty. You've got nothing to feel guilty for creating the wealth, and go and pursue the values that are really meaningful. And so I think the semantics matter, because the semantics are a reflection of the direction the mind goes once you accept a certain phrasing. I think that can be dangerous.
And I guess that's why I sometimes have difficulty with your Bill Gates example that I know you love to use, because his greatness was Microsoft, but can't he also now be, having solved that, having done that, having achieved all that he had achieved, there comes a point at which you go, what is out there that hasn't been solved? And a lot of his philanthropy has been about education and all that he's done. And you sometimes will sort of give that like, oh, that's just everybody loves him for that, and they don't admire Microsoft. But no, I kind of admire that a person moves on at a certain point, and then, and I'll use language that I know you don't like hearing, and thinks about something that's kind of bigger. When I say bigger than myself, it's bigger than my immediate need or my immediate environment. It doesn't mean it's something I'm not interested in or something I need to sacrifice for. But it just means, look, it's in a sphere that I wouldn't otherwise be even able to comprehend or think about if I wasn't in that scenario in the first place.
Yep. All right. Let me answer this, and then let me move on and then go back to getting some other questions. But I do think this is interesting. I will stand by my example of Microsoft in Bill Gates. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think you can do philanthropy and go do good philanthropy and do just philanthropy. When you listen to Bill Gates, when you see him talk about what he's doing, when you look at the philanthropy he is doing and the focus he has chosen, and when he talks about the fact that he feels guilty about the home he has because it's so big and has a trampoline room, and he says something like, "I don't know if I should feel guilty about that." And so if you study Bill Gates, I think what you see is, one, he left Microsoft. He left Microsoft once the government got involved in Microsoft, and he left Microsoft because, to a large extent, he didn't think he could do his job anymore over there because of the way Microsoft was treated. But I think he started the way he structured his philanthropy is structured to do what other people would think is the right thing to do. I don't know. If you look at when he talks, and I've mentioned this in lectures, when he talks about investing in other companies, for example, Bill Gates has invested in fourth generation nuclear power. When you see him talk about stuff like that, he lights up. He's so excited. You can tell that he loves technology and he loves this stuff. When he talks about malaria nets, yeah, it's okay. All I'm saying is, I don't think, and I don't know because I'm not inside Bill Gates' head, I don't think that Bill Gates is motivated by his values when he does some of his philanthropy. I think he is by some and he isn't by others. I think much of it is motivated by the guilt that exists in society, by the guilt that his father, and who's a big-time leftist, and what's his name, Warren Buffett has instilled in him. When he talks about Theory of Justice by John Rawls, and he talks about luck, and he talks about all that, he is emoting the guilt. So I don't think we can just say a wealthy person and say whatever he chooses is okay. Whatever he chooses is his right to choose, but not everything is equally valid. Some things are good and some things are not so good. And I think in the case of Bill Gates, I don't think his choices are motivated by his own self-interest, even in this external sphere, as you like to call it. I think it's motivated by some other things. So I have no problem if Bill Gates would have said, I've got this big problem. I want to cure cancer. I want to solve homelessness in Seattle. I don't know, whatever the teenage kids in Seattle. But I don't think, because this is my passion and this is what's important to me, but I don't think he's motivated by that. I really don't. I think he's motivated by something else. All right, if you got something quick to say, you are, because I know you're unmuted, I'll take that and then I'm going to move on.
All right, I'll just close with saying I think that's a little unfair to Bill Gates. Pre-guessing someone's motivation, I think you claim knowledge that you can't really know, and it could be very, very unfair.
Yeah,
based on.
But whoops, sorry, I unmuted you. I didn't mean to do that. But it could. But I'm going to go on. It could be, but I think you have to judge people, and I judge people, and you can't judge. How do you judge anybody? You've got to take the evidence that's available. You have to get what they say. And Bill Gates is very explicit about what he says because he talks about it. He gives the commencement addresses. He writes about it. I read his stuff. I watch his speeches. I see his interviews on television, and I judge what I detect. And I think it's wrong to just say whatever somebody chooses must be in their self-interest. I mean, that's very dangerous. And that's true of there are lots of people out there that I don't do that with anybody. If I have evidence to the contrary, I take into account that evidence. Now, I know I could be wrong about Bill Gates, but I haven't seen any evidence that I have been. And again, that is not to say that it is wrong when you reach the kind of wealth that Bill Gates has to do philanthropy. It's fine. I just don't think he and many others, and I've talked to some of them, I've talked to people about why you signed the Giving Pledge. And many of them signed the Giving Pledge because they think it's what is expected of them, and they feel guilty. And again, Bill Gates says he feels guilty. It's not, I don't have to invent that. I can send you quotes where he says it, lucky and guilty. So allow me to doubt what he does, given that he's motivated partially by guilt. All right, we're going to go another round, and then we're going to go to the super chat questions. I've got a few of them already. Jennifer.
Have you ever heard the theory that if it ever got to the point where people started an actual physical armed revolution against our government, that there was a lot of them, like let's say millions, that our military would not fight against the American people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably some truth to that. It depends on what the revolution was about. It depends on what was the motivation for it, who was rebelling and against what. You know, it's really hard to tell what the military's incentive. I mean, I don't trust our generals. I'm very skeptical of our generals, and maybe I shouldn't be doubting their motivations either. But, you know, again, I've read Petraeus. I've read, what's his name, who resigned, the general who's Secretary of Defense under Trump. I've read these guys. I don't admire them. I don't respect them. I worry about them. But the troops on the ground I have respect for. And certainly, again, I think it depends what it's all about, what the revolution is about. If the revolution started tomorrow and it was about free markets and individual rights, then yeah, I think the military would crush it without even thinking twice about it. But you could imagine different revolutions. If the revolution is between the left and the right in America, I don't know what the military would do. It depends who the president was. So and the military is not one uniform thing. I think some soldiers would defect and go and join the revolution. Other soldiers would join the other parties. I hope we never get to see what actually happens, because I think it would be horrific.
Thank you.
But I don't know. I don't have a definitive answer. Jonathan. Ooh, we're getting a bunch of people calling in. Jonathan.
Yeah, and Yaron, as you pointed out recently, a lot of people claim to be ready for the armed revolution, but yet they're too scared even to share articles of yours, or share speeches yours.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, if I could, about what's happening in Hong Kong. But first, quickly you mentioned a couple weeks ago on one of your programs that Tucker Carlson had given a speech called "Why Big Business Hates Your Family," and I thought you were kidding.
No, it's a real speech. I haven't seen if you can see it online, but it's the title of the speech he gave at this conference a few weeks ago.
And just to quickly to go back and see your analysis of this whole national conservatism movement that has been brewing has been very illuminating for me. Onto politics on the different side of the world, though, what do you make of what's going on in these protests in Hong Kong, and how should individualists and supporters of liberty respond to what's going on in Hong Kong right now?
I mean, I think generally I'm very positive about the demonstrations in Hong Kong. I mean, the focus has very much been, we do not want Chinese authoritarianism here in Hong Kong. So the negative is a very positive negative. And I wish we as Americans were doing more, not financially, not militarily certainly, but morally to support them. I think people in Hong Kong and people who love liberty all over the world still look to America in the hope of seeing some support for what they're fighting for, and we're not seeing that, unfortunately. So that's kind of that's sad, and I think that the West generally has been quiet. I mean, the United Kingdom, which has some moral responsibility because they're the ones who handed it over to China, has said to China, threatened China a little bit, and the Chinese basically said, "Oh, stop it! You guys really don't want to threaten us, do you?" And since then, I haven't heard a word from the UK. Now, there's a new government in the UK. We'll let them get into place. I'm mildly optimistic about this government. I think it's kind of got some exciting people in it. So we'll see what happens. But so I think fighting against the Chinese is a good thing, and I think that's exciting. The negative about the demonstrations, and this is true of unfortunately all liberty movements out there in the world, is what are they fighting for? What are they fighting for? Are they fighting for true liberty? Or are they fighting for democracy? And unfortunately, too much of this is a fight for majoritarian rule, for democratic socialism and all this stuff. And if they won what would they actually institute in Hong Kong? Well, they would institute better than what China will institute in Hong Kong, but it's not as good as what Hong Kong has today. So they don't appreciate the status quo, and certainly the status quo under the British, as much as they should. Now, and I don't mean the status quo right now, because right now China's intervening way too much. I mean the status quo, let's say 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when China was not intervening and Hong Kong was still the freest, economically the freest country in the world. And to sustain that, I just don't think that's sustainable, because I don't think the people of Hong Kong want it, and China won't let it happen. So whatever happens, Hong Kong is not going to be as free 10 years from now as it is today economically. And politically, I fear that the Chinese are slowly going to take over. It's really scary. And I was in Hong Kong recently, and people there, the people who understand liberty and freedom are scared, really, really scared. And people who don't understand it are like, China's not that bad. They won't do anything really bad. They're very pragmatic. So, we need to appease them a little bit. If we appease them a little bit, they leave us alone. So I think the older people are pragmatic. The younger people are more idealistic with this regard. The wealthier the people are, the more pragmatic they are, because the more they have to lose by demonstrations. And I talk to people all the time from Hong Kong who tell me, no, these young people, they need to calm down a little bit because China's not that bad. Things will be fine. They're very, so it's like most things in the world. It's a mess. And there's no clear-cut positive that you can see going into the future. There's no, okay, if these people win, good stuff will happen well into the future. Unfortunately, it's not there.
Thank you.
All right, Robbie, you get a second question if you want it.
You're on. All
Yes.
right. Let's go back to the deep end a little bit. Meditation, and in particular Vipassana, mindfulness meditation. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Sam Harris app at all. Is that something you've done? Do you have an opinion on? Where do you stand in relation to that?
I haven't, but I'm not against. I mean, I know objectivists, and I know friends of mine who do it and use it and benefit enormously from it. So I have, so I respect it. I think we all need to find that space where we let our minds calm and we need that calmness and that resetting in a sense I think to help us be more objective about the world out there. I've tried other things that are very similar to meditation. It doesn't work for me. I've tried meditation. It doesn't work for me. I tend to fall asleep. What I find that helps me do what I think meditation helps other people do is I listen to music. So listen to classical music when I put on a classical music, and as I like to say, turn it up to 11 and just turn the room dark and just focus on the music and let myself go. I think that has a very similar effect than what meditation has for other people. Somebody says on the YouTube channel, they say, my meditation for me is opera. And I agree. If I put on an opera, put in just classical music generally has that effect on me. So I'm not against it. I'm for it. I think people need to find the thing that allows them to reset consciousness, to allow them to calm themselves and to be able to face the world more objectively without a lot of the noise that sometimes our subconscious feeds us. So that's the best I can do on that. All right.
I don't know if you're inviting a follow-up or
you can, and then
I can. I was going to say that very often, so mindfulness is very much a way of focusing your attention, and you can, so music and exercise and all these different things that you would sort of volunteer as ways that people can find their release. meditation is something you can do while you're listening to music, something you can do while you're exercising. It's a particular focus of your mind in such a way as to be very, very different from listening to music or playing sports or just being in the zone, that kind of feeling. It isn't about that as much. And so I would just sort of throw it out there for some people that might have some interest in that it isn't analogous to listening to just great opera or great music or anything like that. But if you know how to use your mind in a particular way, then you can use it that way when you listen to your favorite opera or when you look at your favorite painting or when you exercise.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that's not what I'm doing. I don't know, but it's as I said, I know a lot of people who get a huge amount of benefit from it. It sounds like you do too. And I encourage anybody who's interested to try it. What I've tried, has not given me anything more than what I already have. All right, let's see. Whoops. We've got two that I only have your phone numbers, so I'm gonna just say your phone number and you can ask the question. 1-818, and I'm not gonna say the whole phone number. 451. So 818 area code. If you want to ask a question, unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, you're on. Reed McGrew here. Thank you.
Hey, Reed, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, I had a question on the virtue of productive work.
Yep.
And I know Rand emphasized doing work that requires the fullest use of one's faculties. And so I had a question. What if a person who's very intelligent, is an objectivist, but he's just not that ambitious as far as his work is concerned? Take maybe even a truck driver who's really bright, but he's just not using his mind in his work. He uses it maybe in hobbies and objectivism and stuff. Doesn't that set up a possibility of inducing guilt in a person like that?
Well, I don't think it's an issue of guilt, but I do think it's an issue of, are you making the most of your life? And the fact is that most of us spend most of our time at work, or a lot of time at work, if not most of the time. And it's optimal, I'd say it would be optimal if that work provided you the same kind of fuel and the same kind of benefit as the hobbies or whatever they are. So ideally, the ideal would be where you're engaged fully with your mind in those at work, where you're spending most of your time, where you're most challenged, and your hobbies are, maybe doing that as well, and maybe you meditate and listen to music and look at art and do other things. So I think you can't. So now I can imagine a scenario in which you can't make money at what you love doing. So take many artists who cannot make money at what they love doing. So they have to do work that is not something they're completely absorbed in and completely engaged in. But then they are engaged fully in their so-called hobby and the art that they're doing. So that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. As long as there's a realm in your life where you are fully engaged, where you're ambitious, where you're pushing yourself, then I think you can be happy. I'm just saying that the more integrated your life, the better. So an artist, for example, is better off if they don't have to be a waiter, that they can full-time actually be engaged in all this in the artwork, then they're better off objectively, right? So again, there's the ideal. We can't always live the ideal for a variety of reasons, because we can't find the right work, because we can't make a living at what we love doing, because we're not ambitious in a particular field, and the field we're ambitious in, we're not making money in. So I get that, but again, ideally, all of that is integrated. That would be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't want to induce guilt. What I want to induce is ambition. That is, I want people to think about, how do I make my life the best life that it can be? And if it turns out that the best life that you can be is being a truck driver during the day and studying philosophy at night, or or working on your artwork at night, or whatever the engaging thing that you love doing is, then if that's the best, then that's the best. That's great. I'm not gonna judge that. All I'm gonna do is push you to evaluate. Are you being ambitious, not in particular with regard to a profession? Are you being ambitious with regard to life? That's the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah. So if a person doesn't find a way to be ambitious in terms of their life, that's lacking in them. Does that preclude them from the philosophy?
No, but it precludes them from living a completely happy life. I think they're missing out. And I would say if that's the case, then I think ideally that's what psychologists are for, to help you find that motivation, that ambition, that passion that's going to drive you in a particular direction. I think a good psychologist, it can be very helpful in doing that. And I don't think using a psychologist should be a black mark at all. I think a psychologist is just another tool to improving one's life, to figuring out how to live the best life that one can be. So if somebody struggles with that, then if you're struggling to find what you're really passionate about, then go get professional help. It's like a doctor. There's nothing wrong with that. Does that make sense? You want to, the real point is there's one shot at this life. There's no second chances. So to make the most of every moment of it, you've got to use all the tools that are available out there for you. And if you find something lacking in your life, fix it. Or at least attempt to. Sometimes we can't fix it. I acknowledge that. But attempt to, because life's too precious not to make the effort.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Support. Thanks for the question. All right. Now we're going to the 1843 number. I'm going to unmute you. Hi. Who's this?
Hi, my name's Kim.
Hey, Kim. How's it going?
Hi. Good.
All right.
So my question is like, how in your everyday life, how do you cope with like the far left agenda? What's your coping mechanism?
My coping mechanism is to yell at them, right? This is why I have a microphone. I love doing what I do. I get to yell at the far left and the far right and everybody in between. And I get to criticize everything I see wrong in the culture. And that really is my coping mechanism. It's the way I deal with it. Is I speak up. I say you guys are wrong, and here's why you're wrong. And I think if you don't have a microphone, part of the coping mechanism is to tell people, to like if one of your coworkers says something stupid, leftist, nutty, then say I disagree with that, and just walk away. You don't even have to argue with them, but just saying you disagree, saying there's a different opinion out there, first of all, will give you fuel, and secondly, will change the world in a little way, because she will now know that there's opposition, because so many of these people think that they're immune from opposition because they only interact with people who agree with them. So
that's true.
Speak up. The second coping mechanism I have is I don't watch the news. If you watch CNN or Fox or MSNBC, God forbid, or any of these stations, stop it. It adds nothing to your life and adds huge amounts of stress and anguish, and because all they focus is on the negative and all they spout is nonsense. And so stop it and take that time that you save. Stop, read a newspaper, even if it's a bad newspaper, because newspaper is so much easier to control. You can skim the paragraphs. You can read the news pieces you want to read. You don't have to listen to the nonstop barrage of negativity and ugliness and stupidity that comes across from all these TV stations, of course, except the shows that have Jonathan on Fox Business. That's the one exception. Because at least you get a little bit of rationality, a little voice somewhere. But turn it off and then use that time to do something fun, to do something you love doing, to get away. Because at the end of the day, I don't control politics. As much as I wail on it, as much as I talk about it, I don't control anything that happens in Washington, D.C., and neither do you. So getting upset about it, you got to find a way to learn how to, what was it? God give me the courage to, change what I can change and not, I know what I can't change or something like that.
Right.
You can't change politics. Forget it. Spend spend an hour a day fuming about it and then ignore it. And then go find fun stuff. Play, if you have kids, go play with your kids. If you have friends, go hang out with your friends and go drink a glass of wine and talk about fun stuff that's unrelated to politics. Go watch a great movie. Go, I heard the documentary now on Pavarotti is really good. I'm going to try to go see it tonight or this week. Go watch some good television, not the depressing kind, but something positive and good. Go watch some old 1940s and 1950s movies. Listen to some music. Look at paintings. Go to a museum. Don't let politics consume you. You can't be. And now, while it's important, you can't change it. So it's not quite the metaphysically given. So an hour a day to get angry at it is completely and utterly justified. But more than that, life's too precious. It's too precious.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So so my outlet is I yell and at the microphone, but I watch my favorite TV shows. I do work that interests me. That's unrelated to politics. In finance, I interact with friends. I try to do things that get me out of this world, because if I lived in it constantly, it would be too depressing.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. All right, let me take a super chat question, and don't ask any more super chat questions because we're going to run out of time here. Do you know if Rand influenced the movie Rocky III? The characters talk about purpose in an objectivist way. I don't, and I don't remember Rocky III. I kind of remember Rocky I, but I all the other Rockies are kind of a blur to me. But Ayn Rand has influenced, I think, the culture in important ways and in subtle ways and in ways that are hard for us to know exactly, because so many people have read Atlas Shrugged. So many influential people have read Atlas Shrugged, even in Hollywood. So many influential people all over in politics, everywhere have read Atlas Shrugged. And in subtle little ways, I think Ayn Rand has influenced the world. I've talked about the fact that I don't believe Ronald Reagan and maybe even Margaret Thatcher would have got elected if not for Ayn Rand, because I think she made the ideas of capitalism, the idea of limited government, she made them popular again, sexy again, and turned the tide away from the ever-growing statism and socialism. So I think she had an impact in the 60s and 70s, and I think she continues to have an impact, and even in more subtle things. So whether on that particular movie, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. So for example, think of all the books about self-esteem. Now, most of the books about self-esteem are garbage. I mean, the conception of what self-esteem is garbage. But there's a whole movement in psychology around self-esteem that of course, Nathaniel Branden was part of. Now, would have Nathaniel Branden done all that if not for Ayn Rand? And Ayn Rand was edited his first book, The Psychology of Self-Esteem, which made it so influential. And before they brought self-esteem into the forefront of the discussions, self-esteem was nothing. It wasn't even an issue. So just the issue of self-esteem and the self-help movement is attributable directly, I think, to Ayn Rand and so many other things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of the debates about purpose, particularly the ones about meaning, but that are framed into a purpose rather than a meaning, might be influenced by Rand in one way or another. So I think her influence is underappreciated. I think there's work to be done in, I don't know what you would call the field, in cultural social commentary, in analyzing the influence objectivism has had on the culture already. Particularly Ayn Rand's novels have had on the culture already, but also the work Leonard has done and Leonard Peikoff has had and others have had. But primarily Ayn Rand's novels, and her nonfiction, and her. Remember that when she spoke at Fort Hall Forum in the 60s and 70s, there were lines outside. People, so a lot of people heard her. A lot of people engaged with her ideas. And I'm sure there was a significant influence. And it weren't just nobodies. A lot of those people went on to be influential people in their worlds, whether in the world of business or the world of, or even the world of Hollywood. Doesn't mean they bought into everything. Doesn't mean they accepted all of her ideas, but I think they were influenced by them. All right, I'm going to take 3 of these and then I'm going to go back to your questions. What is the difference between multiculturalism and loving other cultures or loving certain aspects of other cultures, such as cuisine or music? I mean, the main issue with multiculturalism is the idea that all cultures are equal. That's what multiculturalism claims, that there is equal value or significant value in all cultures. And one cannot be discriminating when it comes to cultures. That is very different than saying, no, cultures can be ranked. Some cultures are better than others. Some cultures are superior to others. But that doesn't mean that the inferior cultures don't have some aspect that is positive. Something about them that is good. Food, music, dancing, I don't know, something, right? Literature, there might be a particular poetry. There might be something about, I don't know, Persian poetry that's great, in spite of the fact that Persian culture today is no good, right? So multiculturalism is this idea that everything's equal. And by making everything equal, the real goal of multiculturalism as an ideology, as an ism, is to denigrate Western civilization. It's to denigrate, like all egalitarian ideologies, the goal is not, let me say, like most egalitarian ideologies, the goal is not to raise up the bad, it's to pull down the good. And in this case, it's to denigrate Western civilization, to denigrate good cultures. That's the purpose of multiculturalism. Again, I love other cultures, particularly their food. I love all kinds of food. You know, and there are other values that different cultures have, but that's the beauty of your melting pot that says, bring the best that you have, we'll adopt the best that you have, we'll meld it into our culture, but the garbage, keep out, keep away, right? We don't want the bad stuff from your culture. We only want the good stuff. But even saying that there's good and bad stuff in a culture, the multiculturalists freak out. You're not allowed to say, right? So the whole idea of assimilating into, let's say, American culture is not abandon your pizza, abandon your food. It's let's take on whatever good stuff you have to give, food, music, whatever. But the bad stuff, the barbaric stuff, the primitive stuff, they're just bad, is not going to be part. You have to shed that and embrace the good parts of our culture. Otherwise, you don't belong. So that's the difference. Okay. Let's see. Is art doomed to appeal to the lowest common denominator in a free market? No, not at all. Like everything in a free market, the market is segmented. So there will be some art that appeals to the lowest common denominator that, if you want, the masses will like. But then there'll be a market for different forms of art. There will be market for so-called high quality art or better art. You know, just like if you look at clothing, there's you could go to, I don't know, a Navy or something and get relatively cheap clothes, or you can go to Neiman Marcus and I don't even know where you buy good clothes, but wherever you go to buy really, really fancy clothes, I buy mine on the internet. So you can go wherever, right? And actually now with the internet, you can customize your clothes. You can actually go and there's an app that you put in front of you and it actually measures you. It takes a photo and measures you, and they will make you customize shirts online, right? So you can customize it, and you can pay different amounts for different things. So I think the market gets segmented in a free market based on people's appreciation of the art. But if you take the 19th century, which is the closest we've ever had to a free market, it is also the period with the greatest art that we've ever had. We had classical music that people used to pay. So the masses used to appreciate classical music. And I think part of the decline in appreciation of art goes hand in hand with the mixed economy. It goes hand in hand with government education. It goes hand in hand with the deterioration in the culture that has brought us the mixed economy, that's brought us the kind of the attacks against capitalism. But if you go back to the 19th century, you had great novelists, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Hugo, but you also had adventure stories like Dumas, which are fantastic. They're great stories. And you had folk music, but you also have classical music, and you had in every form of art, you had the best that we've ever had. And that is the most capitalist period in all of human history. So it suggests that maybe capitalism goes together with great art, not the other way around. All right. All right, let's go back to Jennifer.
Do you find it more frustrating to debate an anarchist or a socialist?
Oh, an anarchist, much more frustrating to debate an anarchist. You know, a socialist is never going to be confused with me. I don't have to spend a lot of time saying, I don't agree with that. You know, this is wrong. I don't have to, even though I agree with this, I disagree with that. I don't, you know, with the socialists, it's clear cut. We disagree about everything, you know, pretty much about every, and with an anarchist, we're too similar in superficial ways, not in any fundamental way, but in superficial ways. And I also find them more, in some sense, dishonest, because an anarchist has probably read Ayn Rand. An anarchist is probably engaged with the ideas of objectivism. An anarchist should know that capitalism requires a monopoly over the use of force, over the use of retaliatory force, that you can't have markets without a system of objective laws. They should know that. This is not hard stuff. And yet they ignore it. They evade that. So I find it much more frustrating to debate an anarchist. And I find them a lot more, in some ways, dishonest or unwilling to even consider. Now, some socialists are just evil, but that's okay. But I get that. And the audience gets immediately. There's the clashes of real fundamental issues here. The only time I publicly debated an anarchist on anarchy, I made as much effort as I could to say, we're really different. There's nothing similar about our positions, and it's still hard for the audience to get that. And I find that frustrating.
Thank you.
All right, Jonathan.
Yaron, I've enjoyed your presentations lately about Florence and some of your non-political ideas, and I love how you're really emphasizing more and more these days about how objectivism is for living on Earth and enjoying your life on Earth and loving your life on Earth. So that's really revives my spirit as well. That said, I want to ask you about politics if I could, just because it's more of a question of history. This last week, there's a lot of talk about the death of the Tea Party, and I wanted to ask you about the Occupy Wall Street movement that was kind of brewing at the same time as the Tea Party. And it seems to me almost as if the Tea Party, as we used to know it, died, but the Occupy movement all of a sudden essentially went mainstream, because so much of what Occupy Wall Street used to talk about, today's candidates on both sides of the aisle now are espousing as mainstream. Do you have any comments on what you remember about Occupy Wall Street?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that the problem with the difference between the two is that the Occupy knew what they wanted. That is, they had an agenda, was consistent with a moral code, that was consistent with what they believed. They did not trust. They hate Wall Street. They hate bankers. They hate capitalism, and they want to see its destruction. And they're absolute altruists, and that's what they want to see. The Tea Party was fought, so they're consistent, and therefore politicians have arisen, whether it's AOC or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Really, most of the Democratic Party now has adopted much of the rhetoric of the Occupy. In some senses, the rhetoric of the Occupy Wall Street was the rhetoric of the Democratic Party after the financial crisis. They were just more radical about it, and because they were consistent about it, they won. The problem with the Tea Party is it was fundamentally based on an inconsistency. On the one hand, they argued for individualism and for the Constitution. On the other hand, they based it on religion and altruism, and they refused to challenge the big government programs like Medicare, right? Keep your hands off of my Medicare was a big sign in the Tea Parties. And that contradiction ultimately led them, unfortunately, I think mainly to give up on the limited government, Constitution, individualism, and to go more full-fledged on the government will solve our problems. So I think it's the Occupy's consistency that has allowed them to be a long-lasting, horrifically negative impact on the country. I just saw something today. No, I mean, if you go in front of audiences, I mean, the one thing that's an absolute to them is the financial crisis was caused by Wall Street. Nobody from Wall Street went to jail. I mean, the party line of the left is the party line that everybody adopts. And even people on the right think that's true, right? Even people who are conservatives or consider themselves conservatives or on the right think that Wall Street is to blame and it's Wall Street greed that is a problem and we need to rein it in and so on. So that has now become just a whole interpretation of financial crisis. I said at the time, it's really, really important that we identify what caused it and make a big deal out of this, because if we don't, we lose. And we lost because the interpretation of financial crisis, just like the interpretation of Great Depression was, markets created the Great Depression, capitalism failed, which caused the Great Depression, and FDR saved us. That's now in the culture ingrained. The same thing has now happened to the Great Recession. It's Wall Street caused it, and Bernanke and Paulson and Obama saved us. And if you're a Republican, Obama didn't save us, but certainly Bush and Paulson did. But it certainly was Wall Street that caused the problem, left and right, across the board. And when you lose the historical narrative, I've noticed this more and more, and I'm more concerned about it now than ever. When you lose the historical narrative, you lose. You lose. So much of this inequality debate right now is structured around an historical narrative that's just false. And nobody stands up to the historical narrative, a certain telling of the American history, which is just wrong, economic history. And I see we don't have on our side, even among the broader free market movement, we don't have economic historians doing the work, actually doing the work to explain this. So that's horrible. All right. Let's see. Robbie, if you're still there. Yeah, I think you're still there. Robbie, 1, 2, 3, before I go on. Okay, I'm going to go to 818 if you want to ask another question. Area code 818.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, Ron, about, you spoke a little bit about the fact that on immigration that there needs to be comprehensive immigration law reform and also asylum law reform. And I was wondering if you could do a show on that sometime, those reforms, or maybe you can just touch on a little bit what reforms we need there, particularly the asylum reforms.
Well, but yes, I don't know. I might do a show on it. I've done so much on immigration. I'm kind of sick of it. I think comprehensive immigration reform needs to be. There needs to be immigration reform that basically makes it much easier for people to immigrate to the United States, particularly if they can find a job. I think we need to move away from certain types of family-based immigration. I think we need to move away from merit-based immigration, the president's proposal. I think we need to move towards job-based immigration. Anybody who can get a job in the United States should be welcome. And I think we need to stop doing asylum. That is, unless some individual in the United States is willing to guarantee the income of a certain person coming in and say that they are fully responsible for them, we're not a charity. We're not altruistic. We don't just take anybody because they're suffering. So, for example, the United States pays to fly Syrian refugees into the United States and put them up in different communities. No, we shouldn't be paying for any of that. That's not the role of government. The role of government is not to bring people in. They don't do many of that, but they do some of it. I just think we should have a system that says if you're in Guatemala and you're in Syria, or if you're in any one of these places and you pass these screening, an FBI screening, a physical, basic physical, and those two screenings, and you're not a terrorist and stuff, and you have a job in the United States, you're being offered a job in the United States, you should be able to come in. Whether that job is picking apples or whether that job is at a high-tech company, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter whether you're so-called taking an American's job. I think that's all bogus. If you can get a job in the United States, then you should be allowed to come in. And I think visas should be handed out by employment agencies. And I think that's it. That should be immigration reform. Now, in an ideal situation, I believe in other than screening for terrorism, crime, and criminal background and diseases, I think the border should be open. But I accept the fact that in going towards my ideal immigration policies, we're going to have a process to get there. And I think the next step in that process is to open up to anybody who can get a job in the United States and to give them 5-year visas. I also think, that coming to the United States should not guarantee you citizenship. That is, you should be able to come to work, get a 5-year whatever visa, but not be able to vote. So I think citizenship and immigration should be separated. I think they're two separate issues. Anyway, that's my thinking. And I think all the illegal immigrants in the United States should be legalized. And again, I don't think that necessarily means they should become citizens, but they should all be given work permits, and we should do it as quickly as possible.
So there should be no asylum process at all?
Well, no, not unless, again, two things happen. You should only get asylum if, one, you get a job and then you don't need asylum, you're coming in based on a job, or two, somebody in the United States is guaranteeing to feed and house and clothe you for the next 5 years or whatever. But it has to be somebody, some individual, or some entity.
Okay, and certainly there should be no quotas, right?
No, there should be no quotas for anything, right?
Right, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Very helpful.
Good. All right. And let's see. I'm going to take some super chat questions. They're accumulating here. Still thinking that limiting gun ownership doesn't hurt a democracy, as I think it does in Venezuela, where they can't take the dictator out due to lack of power. I don't think. I mean, I've said this before. I'll say it again. I don't think that if Venezuelans had rights to guns in the past, that they would be taking over today. I don't think that is the issue in Venezuela, the lack of guns in the hands of the citizenry. I also don't think that Chavez would have allowed people to keep their guns. He would have, let's say there used to be a tradition of a Second Amendment in Venezuela, and everybody would have had the guns. Chavez would have taken their guns, and would they have resisted when they first took their guns, or would he would have changed the gun laws? No, they wouldn't have resisted. They would have handed over the guns because the majority of Venezuelans loved Chavez. So by the time you get to the point where it's a real dictatorship and everybody hates the dictator, nobody has guns anyway because they've been taken away from them. But I don't believe, I don't know a single case where an armed citizenry, because they owned the guns before, overthrew a dictatorship. I mean, I'm prove me wrong, but I don't know of a single one like that. I do know of countries where people didn't have guns and still overthrew a dictatorship. Think the whole of Eastern Europe. when the Berlin Wall came down. Think of, think of Chile. Think of, I don't know, think of lots of these dictatorships that have gone away without the citizenship owning guns. That's because they believed in something, and if they needed guns, what do you do if you're going for a revolution and you need guns? And I've said this all along. You steal them, right? You break into the armories and steal them. And the idea that you can't do that because you don't have that first gun, come on, give me a break. There are plenty of guns in the black market. Buy the guns in the black market. Use those guns to break into the armory, to steal all the guns you need in order to have a revolution. I don't believe that an armed citizenry is what stops authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is a consequence of bad ideas. And when people have bad ideas, having weapons does not make it better, does not solve the problem. This relates to the idea that, the world is shaped by philosophy. The world is shaped by ideas. All right, theory of why Steve Jobs is so lauded and romanticized. Yes, Jeff Bezos is seen as some sort of evil supervillain. I personally love Bezos. So do I. I'd say a few things about Steve Jobs. One is he was cool, and he knew how to do it. He knew how to present himself. He was a genius marketer, more so than anybody else in history, maybe. He knew how to stand on stage. He knew how to talk to people. He knew how to show people how he changed people's lives. And he had one of the great things about Steve Jobs is he was not humble. He stood up there on stage and said, I'm going to change everything about your life. Your life is never going to be the same after what I show you next. And then here comes the iPhone, or here comes the iPad, or here comes the music, iTunes, or whatever it was. He had no qualms about taking credit for his life-changing innovation and his life-changing contributions to the world. And he stuck it in people's faces, and I think that's beautiful. Bezos is a mystery, but most people have never seen Bezos. Most people don't know who Bezos is. Most people have never interacted with Bezos, never heard him, never seen him on stage. He's never projected anything. He just has a company that's amazing, that's changed all of our lives. But we need to be reminded that the change of our lives. It turns out we need to be told to change all of our lives. And, that is not something Bezos done. So that, I think, is one thing. One is Steve Jobs just, had this cool factor to him. Second, he exuded pride in the work that he did and the achievements he made. He was not afraid to tell people that. Three is you underestimate how many people hate Steve Jobs. I remember a few months after he died, the newspaper articles coming out and said Steve Jobs was an SOB. He never gave to charity. Apple never gives to charity. Apple did this. Apple does that. Steve Jobs is a jerk. Attacked him. And I think there's a lot under the surface of people who really dislike Steve Jobs. And I think the movies made about Steve Jobs were trying to undercut him to some extent, or the books and movies. So I'm not sure it's universal, but I think the first two reasons are the main reasons. All right. Eric Hoffer talked a lot about the danger of people dedicating themselves to political or religious mass movements. He thought true believers were fleeing from a dysfunctional view of their own self. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I haven't read Eric Hoffer, so I'm not going to comment. I would say, I'm a true believer. So, and I don't believe I have a dysfunctional view of my own self at all. I think for me, my philosophy, now it's not political philosophy, it's a life philosophy, is an extension of my true self, of who I am, of what I am. All right. I often hear collectivists, the worker need capitalists as much as the capitalists need workers comment. No, I think it's the other way around. I think the workers need capitalists to the extent anybody needs anybody far more than capitalists need workers. The capitalist improves the lives of workers by orders of magnitude more than the workers improve the lives of capitalists. This is Ayn Rand's pyramid of ability. my life is impacted a million times more by Steve Jobs, who creates workers, who makes possible workers, and their lives are enriched by the fact that he made an iPhone and they get to use the iPhone as just human beings, and they had a job, then any worker contributes to anything. So workers need the capitalists. Workers need the entrepreneurs. Workers need, without them, the workers are just subsistence farmers. The capitalists, ultimately, the capitalists can do robots to create this stuff. The capitalists can go do something else. The capitalists are very creative, smart, with lots of ingenuity. You can do a lot of things. So the workers need capitalists significantly more than the capitalists need the workers. And the other thing about the workers is, particularly when it comes to menial work, they're interchangeable. There are lots of them, particularly outside the United States, but even in the US. This is why a lot of the really boring, bad, unpleasant work has gone to China, in the future might go to Africa. It's because workers can be interchangeable. You can take them from anywhere. There are billions of them. There's no shortage in workers. There's a hell of a shortage in capitalists, a hell of a shortage in entrepreneurs, a hell of a shortage of scientists, engineers, creators, builders, makers, people taking risks. That's the shortage. That's where the real value is created. Okay, how can I find other objectivists to start friendships in a romantic relationship with? There aren't many 21-year-olds who like Ayn Rand. That is a major problem in life. It really is. I would say a number of things. One, go to objectivist conferences. Definitely come to OCON. There were a lot of young people at OCON. Hang out with the young people. Get to know them. A lot of students come. There's also conference ARCon, where we have student conferences. Come to as many of those kind of social events, particularly ones geared towards young people, that you can, in order to try to meet people your own age. I know a lot of people who met and later got married at objectivist conferences. Second, use social media. It's tricky, and I don't know how to do it, and I wouldn't know how to do it, but try to use social media to establish relationships with people, to find friends, and ultimately also romantic relationships with people on social media, whether it's on Facebook, mainly Facebook, I guess, or other places. But there are lots of young people on Facebook or Instagram, or wherever young people happen to hang out these days, and use those tools to establish relationships. I think those are the two main things. And then go out there and find, the other thing to do is go find people who are good people. They don't have to be objectivists. And then maybe you can give them an Ayn Rand book to read. My wife, when I met her, was not an objectivist. I gave her The Fountainhead on the first date. I was a pretty dumb young man. And she loved it. And so I could say I turned her into an objectivist. Now, she already had many of the characteristics that made her an objectivist, made objectivism come easy to her, much easier to her than to me. But she responded immediately to Ayn Rand positively. And that's how I found my romantic relationship. You don't have to have it just be objectivist. Find somebody who's good, who's interesting, who's different, and challenge them with an Ayn Rand book. Get to know them. All right. Thoughts on the writer Stephen King. I don't have many thoughts on Stephen King. I haven't read much Stephen King. I've seen mainly movies of his. I find many of his stories clever, others silly. So I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to comment. I don't know much. How to cope with never having kissed a girl at the age of 20? Well, the way to cope is to find a girl, to find somebody who likes you, to find somebody you can like, to engage in a relationship. But to do that, you don't start with kissing her. And the goal should not be just to kiss a girl. The goal should be to find a girl that shares your values, to find a girl that you can really, like and ultimately love, and then to kiss her, right? But first you have to like her. First you have to share values with her. And the way to do that is go meet people. Go meet people. Get out of your shell and go hang out with people and go try to find people who are, engaging and fun and interesting and worthy of being kissed. But for that, you also have to be worthy of being kissed. And to be worthy of being kissed, you have to focus on how do you become a better human being? How do you become the best version of yourself possible? And I know you say you're desperate at having sex. Well, get over it. What you should be desperate for is having a meaningful relationship with somebody. And until you are willing, until you are interested in having a meaningful relationship with somebody, you know, sex is just not going to happen. And, you know, unless you're willing to pay a prostitute, and that would be sad if that was the first way in which you experience sex. Focus on making yourself a good human being, and focus on meeting people, and focus on establishing relationship with people. And the kissing and sex will come. And then if you find it very, very difficult to turn yourself into the kind of human being that can relate to other human beings, then I recommend that you see a psychologist. Again, find ways to improve yourself. Focus all your efforts on self-improvement. If you're good, really good, not superficially good, not good in your head because you've convinced yourself you're good, but you're really a well-rounded human being, then sex will not be that hard to find. Right? But if you're not, then it will be. And I strongly recommend going to see a psychologist if you're not. Now, I'm not going to give you pickup lines. I don't believe in pickup lines. I'm not going to give you, easy ways to just pick up women and go sleep with them, because I think that's silly. What you should be focused on rather than that, if you want to do that, then just go see a prostitute. What you should be really focused on is getting a relationship, having a relationship. And to do that, you need to first be worthy of one. Okay. Have you visited Berlin? Any thoughts on the city itself? I noticed that you have pro-Cuba posters up. I noticed they have pro-Cuba posters up. Socialism seems as trendy out here as in the US, despite its history. They blame Russians, not communism. Yeah, I mean, socialism is a worldwide trend. It's more popular in Europe than it is in the United States. And Germany, it's certainly popular in Germany. Berlin was an interesting place. I generally don't like Germany. I just can't get over the language, the associations I have with Germany and World War II, and the German philosophers and all the bad that has come out of Germany. I have a difficulty when I'm there, but Berlin was an interesting place. East Berlin, particularly, to see all the modern buildings there, to see kind of the very, if you will, artsy, cool scene there. But it's also very avant-garde, and I'm not surprised that it's very socialist. That's what appeals to the young these days. That's what appeals to them. I think it's sad to see in a former communist country the rise of socialism and a sympathy and a kind of a tolerance of socialism that just should be unthinkable to people who actually lived it, or to people who have a memory of it. All right. I think this will be the last question. Maybe I'll give Jennifer the opportunity to ask one last question after this. Considering China as a growing national security threat, shouldn't there be a national security override of the free market in their case? Well, first you have to make the case that China is a growing national security threat. I don't necessarily buy it. I don't necessarily agree that China is indeed a national security threat or growing one. You'd have to make a real case for that. And then you would have to make a case for what you're doing against it. That is China an enemy? And do we treat it as an enemy, which means we embargo it, we don't have anything to do with it, we don't trade, we don't sell it, we don't do anything? Is it a threat? How much of a threat? If it's a threat, in what dimension? Should we restrict sale of technology to China? Maybe. But then you have to be very clear. The problem I see today, and this is a problem about any topic, is there's no national security establishment today, and certainly not Trump or any of his people, who actually can articulate a clear case for what America's national security is and requires. And then they would have to articulate clearly in what way China constitutes a threat to that national security. And then they would have to articulate how we should go about defending our national security. Now, I have no problem in having specific measures that deal with national security, technology-wise, weapons-wise, otherwise. But I don't trust the people in power to know what they're doing, to have any clue about what they're doing. I don't trust the Secretary of Defense. I don't trust the people at the Pentagon. I don't trust our generals, and I certainly don't trust the Commander-in-Chief or the people at the think tanks who do national security. I used to be a regular commentator on foreign policy. I know the quality of the work that people do in foreign policy in the national security establishment, and it's not very good. So, I mean, I'm sure there are people in the military who are good, but outside of the military, I don't find much of what they do very good because they have a very perverted sense of national security, very perverted sense of American interests. So yeah, we can override what you call the free market in the name of protecting individual rights of Americans. But then you have to make a case for that. And I haven't seen that case. I haven't seen that case in the kind of detail that you would have to do it. And I haven't seen the case for what ways you would limit trade in order to make the problem go away, in a sense. All right, Jennifer, you have the last question, if you want it.
I hope the answer to this isn't obvious, but why does passion sell arguments?
Why does what?
Why does passion sell arguments?
Well, does it? Why do you think it does? What?
It seems like it does sometimes. In history, it has.
So why does passion sell arguments? So I think there are two possible reasons. One is because people don't think. And then people are moved emotionally. And passion moves them emotionally, right? Hitler yelling and screaming, Marx appealing to their Christianity in a sense, the altruism, emotion, passion. So to the extent that a culture is impacted by unreason, then emotion appeals to them and emotion will sway them, right? So they are likely to be, they're emotional. So emotions move, emotions play. But even in a rational culture, because I'm a pretty passionate guy and I try to sell my ideas with passion. I think what my passion conveys is moral seriousness, right? I'm not disinterested in what's going on in the world. My passion conveys that I care. My passion conveys that it matters to me, that it's not just a game, that it's not just a theory, but it's real. It's life or death. And I think that's why I hope that my passion influences people, that helps them to see, to take me seriously, because it adds another dimension. Oh, this guy's serious. This guy it gives it a moral dimension. To me, I don't always have to talk about morality, but because I'm passionate, people have a sense, oh, this guy views it as right or wrong, good or bad. It's really important to him. And that's a moral conviction. It conveys moral conviction. And I think moral conviction sells. And again, it sells because people want to be good. They take morality seriously, whether explicitly or at their level of emotions. I think that's right.
Thank you, Yaron.
Good question, Jennifer. All right, everybody, thank you. I'm sure we'll now be able to splice all this up and release some of these questions as short videos. Thank you, Christian, who will be doing the work. Thank you, all of you, for asking the questions. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Jennifer, for being such great supporters. Thank you for the other two callers who I'm sorry, but I've forgotten your names. Thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for all the SuperChat questions who, by using SuperChat, have contributed to the show today. I know some of you actually contribute quite a bit because you ask a lot of questions over time. Thank you, all of you, for listening. Don't be afraid to share. Don't forget to share. Subscribe to the Yaron Brook Show, to the channel. And don't forget, if you like what I do, support what I do at yaronbrookshow.com/support or at subscribestar.com/support. Yaron Brook. Yaron Brook Show /support and subscribestar.com/Yaron Brook Show. And I will see you all, I think, tomorrow at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. East Coast time. Tomorrow, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We're going to get 5 shows in a row here. I'm not sure what the theme is tomorrow, but Tuesday we'll have Amy on. And I think tomorrow will be 8 o'clock. On Tuesday, I'll try to do 7 o'clock. We'll see if I can manage that. All right, everybody. Have a great night. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Goodbye, Yaron.
Bye, Jennifer.